In 1924, the most trusted engineer in California walked into a narrow canyon north of Los Angeles, pointed at the ground, and said, "Build a dam here." Nobody argued. Nobody told him to stop. And why would they? This was the man who had already dragged water 233 miles across open desert to keep the city alive. When William Mulholland told you something was safe, you believed him. Los Angeles believed him. It took 2 years to build. 2 years after that, just before midnight, it tore itself open in the dark and sent nearly 12.5 billion gallons of water down a sleeping valley. More than 400 people drowned, most of them before they ever woke up. The dam has been gone for almost a century. They dynamited what was left in 1929, so I rebuilt it with AI from the original engineering drawings and construction photographs. What you are about to see is the full build. The canyon before the dam, 2 years of construction, 2 years of the reservoir filling, and the night it came apart. And if you enjoy what you see, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. To understand how a dam this dangerous ever got built, you have to understand the man who built it, because for most of his life he could do no wrong. William Mulholland arrived in Los Angeles in the 1870s with no money and no engineering degree. He started out as a ditch tender for the city's water company, taught himself the trade by reading at night, and worked his way up until he was running the whole operation. When the city began to outgrow its local water supply, Mulholland's answer was enormous in every sense. The Los Angeles Aqueduct, a system that pulled water 233 miles out of the Owens Valley and carried it down to the city using nothing but gravity. It opened in 1913, on time and under budget, and it turned Mulholland into a civic hero. People talked about him as the man who had made the modern city physically possible. But Los Angeles would not stop growing. The population was a little over 100,000 in 1900. By 1910, it had more than tripled, and by 1920 it had passed 575,000, with no sign of slowing down. All of that depended on a single aqueduct running for hundreds of miles through dry, shaking country. If that line ever broke, whether from an earthquake or sabotage, the city had almost no water in reserve to fall back on. So Mulholland set out to build storage. He wanted reservoirs close to the city, big enough to hold a year of water in case the aqueduct was ever cut. He built a string of them. The largest, and the one that would carry his reputation, was planned for a quiet canyon north of the city. Mulholland already knew San Francisco Canyon well. He had spent time there years earlier, while the aqueduct was under construction, and he had his eye on a particular spot where the canyon walls pinched together above a wide upstream basin. To an engineer, it looked close to ideal. A narrow throat meant he could hold back a huge reservoir with a relatively modest dam between the two hydroelectric powerhouses that already sat in the canyon. The site was about 40 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles, in the Sierra Pelona Mountains. The trouble was the rock on either side of that narrow throat, though at the time, nobody treated it as trouble. The western wall was a reddish conglomerate, a rock made of pebbles and sediment cemented loosely together. Drop a piece of it into a glass of water and it falls apart in your hand. The eastern wall was mica schist, a slick layered rock that the construction crews themselves nicknamed heavy ground because it shifted and swelled when they dug into it. At one point, workers cut a tunnel roughly 30 feet into that eastern rock to test its quality, big enough to push a wheelbarrow through, and then left it open for months before filling it back in. What nobody knew in the 1920s was that the entire eastern hillside was sitting on top of an ancient landslide. The ground there had already failed once, long before any human ever stood in the canyon. That fact would stay buried for decades. Mulholland looked at all of this and saw favorable topography. He ordered no deep geological survey of the foundation. At the time, almost nobody building dams did. The St. Francis Dam was designed largely by eye and by comparing it to other dams that were already standing somewhere else. Crews began placing concrete in the canyon in August 1924. What rose over the next 2 years was a curved concrete gravity dam, the kind that holds water back through sheer weight rather than any clever distribution of force. Its downstream face was built as a series of steps, each one 5 feet high, climbing back up towards the crest. It had spillways to carry off any overflow and a set of large outlet pipes near the base to release water into the aqueduct. It was only the second concrete dam the Los Angeles Water Bureau had ever attempted, part of a wider program of dam building the city had launched a few years earlier. And while it was going up, the plans kept changing. The original design called for a dam 175 feet tall, holding a reservoir of about 30,000 acre-feet. Before construction had gotten far, Mulholland decided to raise it 10 feet to hold more water. Then, in July 1925, with the dam already roughly halfway built, he raised it again, to a final height of around 185 feet above the canyon floor, and close to 205 feet measured from its deepest point in the foundation. By the time he was done, the reservoir would hold around 38,000 acre-feet, nearly 12.5 billion gallons. Each increase meant a deeper, heavier body of water leaning on the structure. Here's the decision engineers still circle back to. Every time Mulholland raised the height, he left the base essentially as it was. A taller dam holding a deeper reservoir needs a thicker, wider foundation to resist being pushed downstream and lifted from below by water pressure. The St. Francis Dam kept growing upward while its footing stayed the same. The concrete used to build it was unreinforced and lighter than it should have been, which only lowered the margin of safety further. Because the reservoir was now going to be larger than first planned, the water would have spilled over a low saddle in the western ridge, so the crews added a long wing dike, around 588 feet, running out along that ridge to keep the water penned in. When the main dam was finished in May 1926, it stood as a pale, stepped wall wedged across the canyon, with a reservoir backing up behind it for 3 miles. On paper, it was a triumph. It was the largest reservoir Mulholland had ever built, and the crown on a long career. Water began filling the reservoir in March 1926, and it rose gradually over the next 2 years as the aqueduct fed it. Cracks showed up almost from the start. Most were waved off as ordinary temperature and shrinkage cracks, the kind concrete develops as it cures and as hot days turn into cold nights. Leaks appeared under both abutments. In 1927, fresh cracks opened in the wing dike. None of it alarmed Mulholland. He had seen cracks in plenty of dams that were still standing perfectly well, and if you had asked him that winter, he would have told you this one was no different. By late February 1928, there was a steady leak at the base of the wing dike, running at several gallons a second. When it grew, Mulholland had a drain pipe installed to carry the water clear. By now, the hillside around the dam was visibly wet, and some of the families living down in the canyon had begun to talk about it among themselves, uneasy about what they were seeing. On March 7, 1928, the reservoir reached its full capacity for the very first time, the water sitting only about 3 feet below the crest. Everything the dam had been designed to hold, it was now holding all at once. The structure had never been tested at full load before, and it was being tested now. On the morning of March 12, 1928, the dam keeper, a man named Tony Harnischfeger, walked the dam as he did every day and found a new leak on the western side. The water coming out of it looked muddy. To anyone who understood dams, muddy water was the warning that mattered most, because it can mean the foundation itself is being eaten away beneath the concrete. Harnischfeger reported it at once. Mulholland drove out to the canyon with his assistant, Harvey Van Norman, and the two of them inspected the leak in person. They followed it back, looked at where the water was actually coming from, and decided the mud was runoff from a freshly cut road nearby, not the foundation washing out. Mulholland pronounced the dam safe. Then he and Van Norman drove back to Los Angeles and sat down to a late lunch. I want you to stop on that for a second. The most experienced dam builder in the state stood at the exact spot where his dam was quietly beginning to die, looked straight at the warning sign, and decided it meant nothing. He drove home and had lunch. Less than 12 hours later, every person living in that canyon was running for their life in the dark, and most of them never got the chance to. That gap between how certain he was that morning and what happened that night is the entire tragedy compressed into a single day. At about 3 minutes before midnight on March 12, 1928, the St. Francis Dam gave way. It did not crack and slowly drain. It came apart. The eastern side, the one resting on that ancient landslide, appears to have moved first, and once a section let go, the rest of the dam had nothing to hold it. Close to 12.5 billion gallons of water, the entire reservoir dropped into the canyon at once. The transmission lines crossing the canyon snapped, and lights flickered and went out in the towns nearby, which is the closest thing to a warning that anyone downstream received. A wall of water estimated at well over 100 feet high tore down San Francisco Canyon in total darkness. The first thing in its path was Powerhouse Number 2, a hydroelectric station downstream, along with the cottages where its workers and their families lay sleeping. Almost no one there survived. Around 84 people died at that one site alone. Tony Harnischfeger, the keeper who had flagged the leak that morning, was among the first to be killed. When the water finally finished draining, one piece of the dam was still upright. A single tall section of the center stood alone in the emptied canyon, surrounded by slabs of concrete the size of houses that the flood had picked up and set down like furniture. People started calling it the tombstone. What made this disaster so lethal was everything that lay downstream. The flood burst out of the canyon and into the Santa Clara River Valley, a long agricultural corridor dotted with small towns and farms, and it arrived in the middle of the night. Most people were asleep. The overwhelming majority had no idea the dam even existed, let alone that it had just failed above them. Put yourself in one of those houses for a moment. You are asleep, miles from a structure nobody ever told you about, and the water is already in the valley with you. The water hit Castaic Junction first. One witness described what was left as having been wiped as clean as a pool table. From there, the flood pushed west through the valley toward the sea, tearing through parts of Piru, Fillmore, Bardsdale, Santa Paula, and Saticoy. It ripped out bridges, roads, orchards, and whole houses with families still inside them. By the time it was done, it had cut a path of destruction stretching dozens of miles and, in places, nearly 2 miles wide, with property damage running to several $1 million in 1928 money. A few people did manage to save lives that night. Telephone operators stayed at their switchboards in the dark, ringing ahead to warn the towns below. Highway patrolmen and a handful of ordinary people raced down the valley, banging on doors and shouting for everyone to get to high ground. They are the reason the toll was not far worse than it already was. The flood finally emptied into the Pacific Ocean near Oxnard, having traveled roughly 54 miles in about 5.5 hours. Some bodies were carried all the way out to sea. The official death count settled at somewhere around 431, but almost everyone who has studied it believes the real number was higher. Many of the dead were transient farm workers and migrant families whose names were never on any roster. Some bodies turned up years afterward, and others were never found at all. Only the 1906 San Francisco earthquake had ever taken more lives in California in a single event. A coroner's inquest opened within days, Mulholland testified, and he did not try to push the blame onto anyone else. He said the responsibility was his, and at one point he told the room that he envied the dead. The inquest stopped short of recommending criminal charges. It found no deliberate wrongdoing, but it handed down a verdict that ended his career all the same, stating that the building of a great dam should never be left to the judgment of one man, no matter how respected he was. A separate state commission reached its own blunt conclusion. The dam had failed because of its defective foundation. Mulholland retired soon after. He spent the rest of his life a withdrawn and broken man, and he died in 1935. For decades, the failure was pinned mostly on the crumbling Western conglomerate. Then, in 1995, 67 years after the flood, a geologist named J. David Rogers went back through the evidence and rebuilt the failure sequence from scratch. His conclusion? The eastern abutment sat on top of an ancient landslide. As the reservoir filled and water pressure built against that hillside, it quietly reactivated the same failure plane that had existed there for thousands of years. The dam did not trigger a new collapse. It woke up an old one. So follow what that actually means. Mulholland did not build a dam that later failed. He built it on ground that had already failed, in a landslide older than the human history of California, and no survey he could have run in his lifetime would have found it. The dam was lost the day he pointed at that canyon. It just took 67 years for anyone to prove it. I think that changes where you put the blame. Not remove it, move it. The tombstone, that one surviving section, became a grim tourist attraction in the months after the flood. People drove out to climb on it and pose for photographs in front of it, as though it were a monument rather than a gravestone. The Water Bureau decided it was both dangerous and a painful reminder, and in 1929 they dynamited it into rubble, along with the other large fragments scattered down the canyon. Today, San Francisco Canyon is quiet again. The road winds up past a rebuilt Powerhouse No. 2, and if you know where to look, you can still find chunks of broken concrete half buried in the brush, and the scarred ground where the abutments once gripped the canyon walls. There is no grand memorial. Drive past it today, and you would never know a thing happened here. For a disaster that killed more Californians than almost anything except the Great Earthquake, the site is startlingly empty. 4 years of confidence, 2 years of construction, one dam raised twice and never widened to match, 12.5 billion gallons released in a single night, more than 400 dead before morning. Here is the part I cannot get past. Mulholland was right for decades. Right about the aqueduct, right about the reservoirs, right about the impossible idea that you could grow a city in a desert and keep it alive. The one time he was wrong, he looked straight at the warning on an ordinary Monday morning, decided it was nothing, and drove home to lunch. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and hit subscribe. And let me know in the comments what you would like me to uncover and reconstruct next. And thanks for watching.